What up, Wizards? It's Dev. Mtg wearing the same shirt I was wearing for yesterday's video again, because what is time, right? If there's one thing this spoiler season has taught me, it is that I do not require sleep. Verily, I am but a shambling vessel, haunting the wastes, one at the center of a singularity of my own creation. I will not, I cannot, I must not sleep. But you know what does? Magic cards. That's right, it's my favorite time of the season again, where we take a look at 10 cards from the new set that have gotten lost in the shuffle of all the hype of the really powerful cards that everyone knows for a fact are just obviously good. There are always some cards that slip through the cracks, and that's where we come in. Here's the top 10 sleepers and adventures of the Forgotten Realms. And yeah, we're largely going to pretend that first bit didn't happen. Look, spoiler season is a grind, and it does things to content creators, so support your favorite YouTubers. That's all. Like and subscribe. Music. Do the music thing.
And I'm your favorite magic channel's favorite magic channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck techs. I come correct like a porn star, slicing up all these other suckers with my sword mark.
And we're back on the other side of the intro. And you know why you should be happy, Magic playing YouTube viewer? Because I just recorded this whole lengthy bit about how competitive players feel about this set and blah, blah, blah. And then I realized that that bit was like 5 minutes long. And I feel like the better way to make a YouTube video would just be to get to the list, because that's what you clicked for. So I think I can say everything way more succinctly than I was going to, though. And that is that I know that Spikes don't see a whole lot out of this set, from what I understand, from what I can gather, that they think will affect Standard on a competitive level. And I get that argument, but as usual, I still think there are a ton of cards that people just aren't seeing for what they really are. So let's get into them, starting with the honorable mentions. As usual, the honorable mentions are for cards that I'm just really not sure about, but I still like one way or the other, and I want to shine a little bit of a spotlight on them in case they never otherwise get that chance, right? That would be sad. So let's start at kind of the bottom of the barrel here with Adult Gold Dragon for just a moment. I just want to point this card out to you, because it's a Goldspan Dragon, kind of, right? It's a 4-power flying haste dude for 5 mana, but this one has lifelink, which I actually think might turn out to be better than we think. There's been a few times where I've dropped a Goldspan Dragon against aggro and then died the next turn. This makes sure that you can at least race a little bit better, so that's kind of nice. I like the cut of this card right here, but I'm not sure it ever actually does anything, especially in a Standard with Goldspan, which I think is an objectively better card, all things considered, but this is probably at least better than people think it is. I also really like Mimic, at least as a Magic card design. In video games, I tend to hate this, and it tilts me when I go up to a treasure chest, and it's like, oh no, it's a monster instead of an item or something. I can't stand that, but as a Magic card, I actually kind of really like this. It's a cross between a 2-mana Mana Rock, which is a good territory to be in, and a like creature land, or maybe something like a Riddle form, you know. Although Riddle form is probably way better in the early game, depending on what deck you're playing these cards in, whereas this card becomes way better once you're out of cards in your hand. You can no longer like proc a card like Riddle form. So late in the game, you can just turn this on. It's a creature, maybe you top deck it, and the treasure part of it isn't very good anymore. Well, at least you got a 3/3 that can't be killed by like sorcery speed removal and sweepers and stuff, and that's not a bad place to be. Or you can just play it on turn 2 and you get a one-shot Mana Rock, which is also kind of okay. It's ramp that any deck can play, but it's also like anti-sweeper, anti-control deck that any deck can play too. So I kind of like this card, and even though I think that it's probably not worth the opportunity cost in most of the decks you want to put it in, I do think that maybe in a deck that heavily prioritizes artifacts, this thing could have a future. And finally, Boots of Speed, which I guess is the best honorable mention that still I don't think is quite good enough to make the list. Basically giving all of your creatures for the rest of the game haste for just an extra mana is pretty good. It's in some situations I can actually see this being okay, and it actually gives the creature like a tiny little boost too. So I don't know, like it might be a little bit better than we're judging it right now, because just having this sit on the battlefield and threatening to give any creature you play for the rest of the game haste is actually kind of good depending on the board state and what you're playing against. Yes, I have moved the camera down slightly since the last time you saw me. You're not going nuts. But anyway, let's get on to the actual list here, starting with number 10, which is kind of an extension of the honorable mentions, as usual. But I like this card better than all 3 of the cards I just talked about. So if you don't mind, let's have a discussion about Skullport Merchant, because I actually think this card's pretty good. Okay, so the floor on this is it just leaves behind a treasure token, And your opponent also used a removal spell on it for some reason, so you probably feel good about that. But either way, that's a pretty decent floor, and the ceiling is just extra cards. And you get to proc, dies triggers and stuff, like Serrated Scorpion and Eye Twitch, like learn for a card and draw a card for a couple of mana. That's a pretty good deal, This dude is no, I don't know, tireless tracker or anything like that. He doesn't get bigger as the game goes on. He doesn't generate resources by himself beyond the first one. So it's a weird comparison, but I still think it's a somewhat apt comparison because this guy is going to draw you cards all game. And in mono black, he effectively ramps you. Like if you don't want to sack the treasure to draw a card later, he ramps you into a 5-drop in the next turn. Or maybe you don't drop a land, so he gets you to your 4-drop like guaranteed. There's a lot of good stuff about this. I'm not super sure about it, but it is a ton of value, right? Mono black ramp that also draws cards in a color that needs some card draw. Kind of sign me up for this. I like it probably more than I should, but I think there's a lot of good reasons to like it. But speaking of skulls, let's talk about skeletal swarming for just a second, if you indulge me, as I know that this card looks super silly, but it has to be my number 9. I actually think this card might have a little bit more to it than meets the eye. Now look, 5 mana is a lot for a Bitter Blossom, but it's kind of a sort of a Bitter Blossom. And, during spoiler season, I kind of took marks off of this card because sometimes it's going to create a skeleton which runs its head into combat, gets blocked by something way bigger than it, and then it just dies. Cool thing about that, though, that I didn't really get to point out during spoiler season because I didn't realize it, is that if you do have to run a skeleton into combat and it just dies, you create 2 skeletons during your end step, and that's actually pretty good. But I still think that where this probably finds a home eventually, especially after rotation, is in a deck that has access to a fair number of sweepers and removal spells of its own, right? A deck that can keep the board state relatively clear and just use this as a never-ending creature factory that sometimes makes 2 creatures. This card also goes somewhat well with shapeshifters, cards that are effectively changelings that have every creature type. Realm walkers and whatnot. This card goes really well with them because you can just curve out, I guess, with shapeshifters and then drop this on turn 4 or 5 if you got a little bit of ramp on turn 4. And then suddenly, all your dudes get pretty big. That could work too if you really want to be janky about it, and I do. My number 8 is Unexpected Windfall. The more I look at this card, the more I like it. On stream, when we were doing the spoilers on stream one night, I talked myself into this one after not much talking. I have to think about it for long because at first I was like, oh, okay, it's crap. But actually, when you think about it, it's not just a thrill of possibility that's bad. It's a thrill of possibility that's stapled to a migration path. Or I guess, what is it called? A pirate's plunder, pirate's pillage. People tried to tell me what it was called. Just a strictly better version of that card because of the instant speed. If you can pull this off at the end of your opponent's turn, you get to throw down a couple of bad cards, maybe even, reanimate them later or escape them somehow, something like that. You can play in the graveyard. And draw 2, while also going up 2 in mana. Again, migration path stapled to thrill of possibility is actually kind of an exciting card in a lot of different decks, whether it's a combo deck that's looking to churn through its deck relatively quickly, but still has expensive cards to play, so this ramps you 2, you can start on 4 at the end of your opponent's turn, and then the next turn have 7 mana after you played a land. That's actually pretty exciting when you think about it. Even without playing a land, you can play this at the end of your opponent's turn, and then untap, and play the 6 mana legendary dragon from the set and get in for 6. That seems okay. Just out of nowhere. That seems pretty fine to me. If you have a Goldspan Dragon out when you play this, or maybe you play this EOT, next turn you slam a land, play Goldspan Dragon, well then you just still have 4 mana left to play with. And then maybe you attack with the Goldspan, you have 6 mana to play with. So there's a lot of really cool stuff about this card that I didn't see for the first 20 seconds I looked at it, but after just a little bit, you start to realize that a card like this is actually kind of possibly busted. 4 mana looks like a whole lot, but it's not as much as you think. But next, at number 7, let's take a quick look at Ranger class. After I say something real quick, during the spoiler video for all the different classes, I for some reason didn't see that you couldn't level up at instant speed. It says right there on the card you can only level up as a sorcery. I just want to acknowledge that I have now seen that, and the people responsible have been sacked. which would be me, but I have not fired myself. I apologize. I should have, right? But anyway, you can't do it at instant speed. Sorry for any inconvenience that may have caused you. But anyway, a lot of these got a lot worse after realizing that you can only level up at sorcery speed. But this one still looks kind of okay to me. It really does. You know, there are a couple that aren't necessarily sleepers because people are planning to do a whole lot with them. But I think this one is slipping just a little bit under the radar, and I think that it's actually really good value. Just 2 mana to get a bear when it ETBs is actually more ETB value than just about any of these will give you. So that's kind of nice. You know, the floor on it is that it gives you a body. And that's kind of okay. So 2 mana, 2/2, not terrible in the first place. But it only costs a couple of mana to level it up. And that's not bad. And then when you level it up, you get like a Luminarch Aspirant, or maybe like a Sparring Regimen. You know, an effect like this, akin to that. Where every time you attack, you get a counter on a guy. So that means the 2/2 that the first chapter made will end up, or the first level made, I guess, will end up becoming a 3/3 and a 4/4, you know, if it's the only creature that you have out. But of course, this will work on just about any creature that you have out, so that's nice. And then on the third mode, it becomes like a Vizier of the Menagerie, which is really sweet, or like 5 mana Vivian's passive ability. We've seen this on a whole bunch of cards. I guess I can throw Realm Walker up here again for the second time this video. How you doing, Realm Walker? Maybe you'll eventually see play in Standard. It's possible, right? No? Maybe. One day. But anyway, we've seen this effect on green cards a few times in the past, and it's a pretty sweet effect, especially if you got a bunch of creatures in your deck, and, you know, you're green. So the problem is, though, if you get a Ranger class on top of your library, you can't play the Ranger class, which I guess kind of, it sucks. It doesn't have much synergy with itself in that way. But still, I think that all 3 of these modes are pretty decent. There's a card advantage mode. There's a mode that lets you win stalemates and make your creatures bigger as the game goes on. And there's a mode that just makes a guy. And I think they're all arranged in the proper order. So I don't see anything truly terrible about this card. The last mode does cost a whole lot to level up to, but even level 2 is not that expensive. Even at sorcery speed, 2 mana really isn't too much to ask. So, you know, by turn 4 or 5, once you start running out of cards or you're off curve or whatever, you can just play a 2-drop, activate this, and then suddenly your dudes get bigger every turn, which is sweet. So I don't know. I think that there's something about this one that's a little bit better than most of the others. For number 6, let's take a look at the Black Staff of Waterdeep. This actually, I kind of blew this one off too during spoiler season. I don't think I gave an accurate enough picture of how much I like this card, because there's a lot that can be done with it. For one, there's some really janky stuff you can do with this, like, I don't know what happens when you take the blue talisman, you turn it into a creature, and you equip another blue talisman to it, and you swing, and then you create a copy of the talisman after you sack the talisman, but the copy is a 4/4, but you can still equip the copy, right? Like, how does that work? Tell me how 2 of these Wishcoin talisman things and a black staff works. I want to know. But aside from that, I think I've got it right. But aside from that, there's some actual good stuff that can be done with this. Matter of fact, talisman maybe should have been on the sleepers list. I think that a one-shot Helm of the Host actually isn't a terrible card. But anyway, there's some actual good stuff you can do with this. Like, imagine the Ozolith, for instance. It just seems hilarious to me. Turn the Ozolith into a 4/4, but of course, it's got all those counters on it, so that actually doesn't seem too bad either. There's still a number of like playable 1 and 2 drop artifacts that do other good stuff that can just incidentally be turned into 4/4 boys thanks to Blackstaff at a relatively low price. You know, like even on a turn where you rip this off the top of your library, it costs a total of 3 mana to turn something into a 4/4, which is a fine rate. Like a haste 4/4. Because if you turn something that's already been out for a couple of turns, it seems good. Like maybe also Portable Hole or Glass Casket. You know, these removal artifacts. Remove a thing and then turn your Glass Casket into a 4/4. Like, it seems fine to me. So I actually think Blackstaff might have a little bit more of a future than we think it does. But now we're getting into like actual really powerful cards that I think will almost certainly affect Standard on some level or another. And number 5 is kind of a weird one, but it's Dragon Turtle. First of all, it's a Dragon Turtle. So if you didn't like it before, consider that. But anyway, I think that this actually has the wheels, boys and ladies as well. I think this card on stats alone is okay. A 3 mana 3/5 with flash. So the way this is going to shake out is your opponent decides they're going to move to combat. So you flash this in, tap down their biggest guy. Next turn, goes around to you. You untap everything but the dragon turtle. Comes around to their next turn, they untap everything but the creature that you froze down. Comes around to your next turn, you untap your dragon turtle. So you get to untap first with your 3/5 guy, which is pretty sweet. If this didn't have flash, I wouldn't consider it at all. But the fact this has flash actually makes me think that it's pretty sweet, right? Like mono blue flash or just blue X flash actually got a couple of pretty sweet pieces, both in the form of 3-drops in this set. This Stygian Soul, is that what it's called? This guy, this 3-mana thing that either taps or freezes down something when it ETBs, depending on how you rolled the dice. I think the Dragon Turtle is probably just a better version of that card in a lot of ways, even though you'll never get to like EOT, play your Dragon Turtle, and then attack on your next turn. You'll never get to do that, and that kind of sucks. I still think this kind of tempo is probably just desirable enough. I gotta pull Ziggy up here because his butt is like sliding down. Anyway, I think that this kind of tempo is exactly what a traditional mono blue tempo deck wants. So, I like this card a lot, basically on stats and flash alone. I missed the opportunity. I should have said it'll be a very powerful tool in that shell. That would have been voila on that pun. Anyway, what's next? Number 4. Number 4 is like definitely going to see standard play. I can just about guarantee that Orb of Dragonkind will show up. Wizards has decided that 2-mana rocks must be bad in order to be printed into standard whatsoever. But in terms of 2-mana rocks, I think this is the best that we've seen in a while, because not only did we already have playable dragons, we just got a whole bunch more playable dragons. Like Ebon Death is a really good looking dragon from this set that this will ramp you into on like turn 3 if you have the right mana for it at least. So that's fine. There's also Tiamat if you want to play that deck, and other playable dragons from the set, but we already had Goldspan Dragon and stuff, so, even if all this really does is like ramp you into a dragon or two and eventually find the Goldspan Dragon in your deck or find the Terror of the Peak so you can combo off, that's really good, and it costs a really low amount of mana to just dig for a dragon and find it. And 7 cards is a lot. 7 cards is a pretty good dig, so even if you only have Goldspan and a few other dragons like the 6-drop dragon in your deck, the 6-drop red dragon, the one that I mentioned earlier, the red one, of the Star Mounts, Inferno of the Star Mounts, that's what it's called, memory. That card. It can dig for that one and find it. If you do have 7 mana, it can dig for that card, find it, and attack with it in the same turn. If you have 6 mana, it can dig for a Goldspan Dragon, find it, and attack with it, all in the same turn. So there's just a lot of really exciting things about this card. And I don't know why, pretty much no one is talking about it, because I think it's playable day 1. We're in the top 3, everybody, reserved for cards that I think are almost certain to see some amount of standard play, but conversely also cards that I think people are not looking at the most. So what cards fit that bill? I think that one of the best contenders is Forsworn Paladin. This card eventually was originally, in the honorable mentions, and it worked its way all the way up to the top 3, because the more I think about it, the better it gets. Obviously, the activated abilities are where this thing shines. I've seen a lot of people put probably too much emphasis on the treasure ability, but the treasure ability is good. Again, just like Skullport Merchant, I was saying this, it's mono black ramp. Or maybe in your mono black deck, you play 20 or 22 lands. You only have 3 lands. You need another one to double spell or something. So, this can get you the land that you haven't gotten yet. In your 3-color Knights deck, it can filter mana for you. If all you've got is black and white, this can get your red mana. So there's some really cool things about that. You've got to cast Embercleave, but you only have 1 red source. This can help you out with that. And in the late game, I actually think this pump ability is really good. And it doesn't just pump itself. I've seen a lot of people comparing this to Knight of the Ebon Legion because of the pump that comes with the Death Touch sometimes. And I love the flavor of the Death Touch. I love the flavor of this card, period, right? This can give any creature a pump and a Death Touch sometimes. It's going to matter. The Death Touch is going to matter. And it's a threat of activation, too. If you have a treasure token laying around, your opponent kind of has to worry about where they block because you have the ability to give even your small guys Death Touch. Or if you have a 3/3, they can't block it with their 5/5. You have the ability to give that guy Death Touch. So I think that's pretty sweet. Well, I guess they should have said they can't block it with their 6/6. The way the stats line up, if you pumped it by 2, it would be able to take out the 5/5. So yeah, they can't. You know what I'm saying. Anyway, threat of activation is important. And if you have enough mana in the late game, even if you only have 6 mana in the late game, and mono red players, think about this. How many times have you had a Phoenix of Ash out? Be careful how you say that. you get demonetized. A Phoenix of Ash out. And you pump it twice to like win the game because you have 6 mana in the late game. That's how this card's going to be. Some percentage of the time, right? You have 2 or 3 guys out. They can't block all of them. So if they leave one guy unblocked, you just sink all your mana in and suddenly your 1/1 gets through for 5 damage. That can win games by itself right there. And the card's even fine as a top deck in the late game because if your opponent just swept the board or something, sure, it can't attack right now, but you can drop it for just a single mana. And then when your next turn rolls around, if it's still out, you can threaten to attack for like 3 to 5 damage, depending on how much mana you have in the late game. So, it's just never a terrible card at almost any point in the game, no matter if you're behind, ahead, top decks, early game. There's a lot of different axes on which this card, I think, will perform pretty well. So I like this card a lot, if you can't tell, because I've been babbling about it for minutes now. So let's move on to number 2, which is Tomb of Annihilation. This card's good. Is it really a card? Is this technically a Magic card? I'm not sure. It kind of exists in a weird no man's land in the exile zone at the beginning of the game, and then you put it into the command zone, even in standard, the first time that you venture. So it never really feels like a card, but I guess it is. But either way, I think this is actually really fantastic for like a mono black aggro deck, or even a mono white aggro deck, or maybe an Orzhov aggro deck. But either way, a really low to the ground aggro deck could use this pretty well if it's got some, decent venture stuff in the deck. And I do think there are some pretty good venture cards that venture at least relatively aggressively. So, you got a couple of pretty good 3-drops in both white and black that can venture admirably. So, by the time the early to mid game rolls around, this could end up dealing a total of, 3 to 5 damage to your opponent, or trip them up by making them discard cards or sacrifice stuff. The whole time you're sacrificing stuff, you don't mind sacrificing, Jack. You've got Serrated Scorpions and Eye Twitches to get card advantage off of and stuff. So if you have to sack dudes, you don't mind. But you can also play like old school Sui Black and just take the damage to the head and not sacrifice stuff, not discard cards. Just take it because you know that you're putting your opponent on a faster clock than you are. So I do like a lot about this card. At the very end, it gives you a body, like a big dude. 4/4 is nothing to sneeze at. And in blocks, it can take anything out because it's got the death touch. So I actually think this is probably the most competitively viable dungeon. But let's move on to number 1. The number 1 card in the set that's not being paid enough attention to and is way better than anyone seems to think. And that, by a very large factor, is Orcus, Prince of Undeath. Nobody talking about it but me. I freaked out and geeked out on this card during spoiler season. I, posted about it on Twitter, said you're not paying enough attention to it, and I still feel that way. After like a week and a half, close to it, about a week of thinking about this card, the thing that kind of scares me is that I still don't have a whole lot to say, There are a bunch of cards over the course of this video that I had way too much to say about. Like the Black Staff of Waterdeep. I gave you probably too many. I probably went too deep, ironically, on that card. But for this card, all I can say is that this is just an obviously solid Magic card. Wake up, sheeple. Is that going to get me demonetized? Is that a thing? I don't mean it, YouTube. I'm not like Alex Jones or something. Is that going to get me demonetized? I don't know. I don't know how YouTube works anymore. But anyway, Orcus looks good. All right. I mean, if this comes down, let's look at this card from just about every axis. This card can come down for just 4 mana and be a 5/3 trample haste, or trample flyer, I mean to say, which is kind of a fine rate. That's kind of good. Not bad. In the late game, if you top deck it or you just save mana up for it or whatever, and you pump 6 or 7 mana into it, then you just give all the creatures -2/-2, or -3/-3 if you have the mana for it. That's going to kill a bunch of creatures. It's going to kill so many creatures. It never kills itself with its own ability. Is saying that going to get me demonetized? What is YouTube? Anyway, I have to worry about so much in terms of just saying stuff on YouTube. But in any case, that's good, right? That situation's fine. Like if you're about to die, then taking out all of your opponent's, 1 and 2 and 3 drops, very likely, is a good mode. That's fine. Even if you're only paying 5 mana for that. Imagine a mode where you pay 5 for this, and everything gets -1/-1. when it enters the battlefield? Well, you just killed all your opponent's selfless saviors, all Seeds of Life's bounties, seasoned Hallow Blades, which is really important, Luminarch aspirants that haven't received counters yet, fervent champions, hall monitors. God, there's way more. Edgewalling keepers, Heart's Desire tokens, tangled Florhedrons, and Alyssian carry added. There's the Archfiend's vessels. Like, we could keep going. There's so many creatures in Standard that are played right now that you can kill just by pumping a single extra mana into this guy. So I think there are going to be plenty of setups against like a mono white deck where you play this guy for 5 mana and you just win. Just instantly win the game. But even for, if you have to pump 6 or 7 into him, he's probably fine in that case too. He also leaves behind a 5/3 flying trampled body. I think I've already mentioned that, but I think that people are just like not seeing that. Like, why would I pay 7 mana for a sweeper? It's like, you're not paying 7 mana for a sweeper. You're not. You're paying 7 mana for a sweeper and a 5/3 flying trample. So that's good. That's pretty good. Meanwhile, though, you can also, again, kind of use this as like an Agadeem's Awakening in the late game. If you're playing against control and the removal half of it is bad or just completely useless, then suddenly you have the ability to not only get a 5/3 flyer, but get like a buttload of stuff back from your graveyard. It's so good. That's so unbelievably good. I do not know why more people aren't pegging this as one of the best cards in the set, because I think it is. Like, I think this is like unironically in the top 10 cards in the set. And it's going to come around to the top 25 cards, like our next video. And I hope that you don't ask me in the comments section, where's Orcus? Because here it is. It's my number 1 sleeper of the set, because not enough of you jerkholes are talking about it, when I think it's almost certainly easily one of the best cards in the set. Whether you play it in Rakdos, Grixis, Jund, which is probably the best home. Let's play it in a ramp deck, right? Let's play it like Hydroid Krasis. Let's play it in our ramp deck. Or maybe it's even in Mardu. Who knows? But either way, this looks like a fantastic card that can end the game, again, on multiple axes. Whether you're trying to attack for the win or you need to not die, this can do so much for you. So that's all my sleepers for this set, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know how you felt about this one down there in the comments section. Take it easy. I haven't slept. I don't even know if I'm going to sleep before we do the stream tonight, because in case you don't know, it's the first day this set's going to be available on Arena. That's today as I put this video out. So I'm probably going to go live at like 8 o'clock tonight, maybe a little bit later, and stream a few hours of this brand new set, and I might actually not sleep before I do that. But anyway, take it easy on me. I'm frazzled at this point, but just let me know how you felt down there in the comments section. Any cards I may have missed that you think might be sleepers, this could have been a top 20 list. And anything you can come up with, I may have looked at too. So let me know down there. Maybe we get an interesting conversation started. Aside from that, if you want to watch me play some Magic this season, go over to twitch.tv and put that series of numerical and alphabetical figures into your computer with your keyboard. And I'll pop up. Or you can check out the Patreon also at that address to help support the content, especially considering I'm not sure that you can do Magic content and be monetized anymore, because there's just so many things you have to say that YouTube looks at like, what'd you just say? so it would really help a lot if you throw $1 a month at the channel, and just that $1 a month will let you vote on what decks we do this season. So I think it's a pretty good deal. But aside from that, I guess I'm done for this one. Just make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications. Otherwise, you won't get them. Doesn't make any sense to me, but hit the bell for the noties in case you want the top 25 cards and gameplay and deck techs and all that stuff. But I gotta get out of here. This video is long, isn't it? This video is long, isn't it? I gotta go. I gotta edit. Anyway, I love you all. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.